How you doing, Sebastian?
Good morning, good evening, Julian. Since I like really negotiated the topic, I'm gonna start us off, and so my opening statement is gonna be very short and simple and to the point. I hope the same is with you. Today I hope to give a legal case to Israel's founding and provide a convincing case as to why I believe the UN has an unfair bias towards Israel, one in which I justify as being very anti-Semitic. And I pass it off to you.
Thanks, Sebastian. Shoot away.
Great. So Israel's founding has all been legal because we have their founders being lawyers. They were the midwives of Israel's independence, and it was not military generals who helped bring about Israel's existence, but rather it was done through a legal process. And I'm going to go through with the legal process from 1917, the Balfour Declaration, to the 1920 San Remo Agreement, to the League of Nations Resolution of 1922, the Anglo-American Convention of 1924, to the United Nations Partition Plan. Now, the United Nations didn't condemn the Arab states that attacked Israel after its lawful establishment in 1948. 1% of their population, most of which included Holocaust survivors, died in this senseless war. Egypt, Transjordan, Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Yemen, and Arab Liberation Army violated international law by invading a newly independent country. Why didn't the UN condemn them? That is the question. But do you have any response to the comments I just made?
I have a rebuttal prepared, but go ahead with your case, please. Just go ahead.
I just gave the first case. I just gave the first case.
Huh? Sure. Yeah. I want a full perspective. So I'm all ears right now.
Okay, great. So the second one, the UN did not condemn Egypt in 1967 and later Jordan for illegally attacking Israel when an armistice line was agreed upon between them following the War of 1948. Why didn't the UN condemn them for that? Because the war was between only Egypt and Syria. Syria had control over Golan Heights, and Egypt had control over Gaza. And Transjordan was Israel negotiated with Jordan to stay out, and Jordan still invaded, losing the West Bank as a result. But the UN did not condemn Jordan for coming into this war and violating international law. So that's another follow-up question to the comment I made. Do you want to rebut, or do you want me to continue?
Okay. I just want to. I'll go ahead and is this your entire argument?
No, that's not my first. That's not my entire argument. Those are my top two arguments that I'm giving, and I pass it off to you.
Oh, at this point, I just want to be patient and hear you out. So,
okay, great. Okay, so number three, we have international courts that are recognized by the UN, and they are even in partnership with the UN. And one of these courts is what we call the International Court of Justice. They deny Israel in every session that they have any special security needs, despite them dealing with terrorist attacks from the PLO and Hamas and face threats from other neighboring Arab countries on a daily basis. Why does the UN condemn those threats and acknowledge that Israel has legitimate security needs? Number four,
why is it? Can I ask you a question, Sebastian? I didn't quite catch who didn't acknowledge in the UN. Could you restate that? I'm sorry.
Correct. The International Court of Justice. The International Court of Justice denies that Israel has any legitimate security needs.
Okay, yes. I got that. What's the next part? That's it. I couldn't quite catch that.
I said the
Something
International
about
Court
the
of
UN
Justice.
And not. The UN and someone didn't recognize.
The UN. The UN recognizes this international court, right? This International Court of Justice. Every session they deny Israel has any legitimate security needs, despite Israel constantly telling them that they have security needs because they face threats of terrorist attacks from Hamas and the PLO and other neighboring Arab countries. And my question
Okay.
was, why doesn't the UN recognize those threats?
Okay.
Okay, and I personally believe it is very incompetent to claim the mantle of human rights and rule of law, and to not recognize Israel is the only country in the world surrounded by so many hostile enemies that threaten its existence daily. Can you provide a rational response to why the U.S. should continue to fund such incompetence, being the UN?
I don't think we should be sending any money to anybody. But in this case, though, I mean that's probably that's kind of a lame answer, and I'd really like to give my rebuttal. Since you're asking a question, I'll go ahead and respond. And that is, as much as I don't want to give any money to anyone, I believe that with the U.S. gives much more money to Israel, and they haven't resolved this, but the U.S. still gives them $20 million a day. I think if the last time I checked, it was the Palestinians got about $1 to $3 million a year. And one of the interesting things about this aid is that, interestingly, Rand Paul, not Ron Paul, he tried to impress AIPAC by cutting aid to the Palestinians, and it was actually AIPAC who went after him and refused to cut the aid. So the same lobby that lobbies for $20 million a year to go to Israel had a problem with the U.S. not giving money to the Palestinians. And morally, I believe the Palestinians that they would have a better right to some aid, because the situation is that Israel's using this money and to force them away from their land in violation of the Fourth Geneva Convention, and they through an occupation that the UN does call illegal. So for that reason, they can't prosper. They can't have a healthy economy. I think one example would be in the West Bank, how it's broken into 3 different territories. And so Israel, and one of the territories is agriculture, and Israel controls all the agriculture in that territory. So to answer your question about the aid, morally they have more of a right to it than the Israelis do. And and actually, let me go ahead and add this as well in there. Because the UN, then I'll talk about this more in my rebuttal, but this really goes to my rebuttal where I say, because of what I'm about to say is that the UN started all this in the first place, this partitioning of land. And the US is the UN. So they have a responsibility for, there's consequences to that action. So that's why we're funding them. And that it's a whole nother question if that's a good idea, if the UN or if foreign aid is a good idea. That's a whole nother topic. But anyway, so did you have more, or should I go ahead with and just use that to kick off my rebuttal? Is this your entire case?
This is your entire case. No, that's not my entire case.
I prefer that you finish your case, and then I'll do a rebuttal.
I also want to give you an even time to respond as well. So that's why I don't want to just keep talking. Okay. So this is my next case. So brace up. In 1947, the British asked the UN to find a solution to the tension in the region. The UN decided the best way to resolve the conflict was to divide the land, which we both agreed to. In November of 1947, the UN voted to create 2 states. The Jews accepted, and yet the Arabs rejected it, later launching an all-out war. Why didn't the UN condemn this act by Arab armies? It was a violation of international law to invade an independent country. In 1967, the Arab League met in Khartoum, Sudan. At the Arab League summit, and issued an infamous 3 no's. No peace with Israel, no recognition of Israel, no negotiations with Israel. Why didn't the UN condemn this summit? In 2000, Prime Minister Ehud Barak met at Camp David with Palestinian Liberation Organization Chairman Yasser Arafat. to conclude a new two-state plan, Barack offered Arafat a Palestinian state.
Sebastian, can I
Yes,
ask you a question?
right.
How many points do you have to your argument? Because I've heard
How
8
many points
points
are-
now, and
No,
it's
that's not
about
eight
10
points.
minutes, so I think we
That's
need to
actually
just go
my
ahead and
fourth
do a
point.
rebuttal.
That's my fourth point. I have 6 points.
Well,
I
I've
have
heard
6
8
points.
points, actually, if I'm telling this right.
All right,
So
you
yeah,
don't
we
have to
got,
go over it because that's going to waste time. If you want to talk, you go ahead and talk.
okay. Because bias against Israel is a conclusion based on the principles of actions, a successful conclusion should be drawn on the premise of resolutions negatively affecting the self-determination of Israel in peace in an unfair way. Rather than your case, I will prove Israel has actually violated over 80 resolutions on a regular basis for 70 years in the most vile ways. Today, Israel wishes to abandon the same authority that created it in the first place. This is a gap to peace. Since you've had the floor for a while, I heard a lot of different, like I said, I think I've got, as far as the rebuttal goes, so as far as the rebuttal goes, maybe I should just put that on pause. So you've had, so what I'm saying, because I want to make this clear, what I'm saying here in that statement is, I think to prove this, and basically, as I've heard 9 or 10 things, I need to know what resolution harmed Israel, because they've been violating 80 of them for years, and it's not just about the Palestinians. Actually, the non-proliferate, they're not a member of the non-proliferation treaty. They refused to sign it. That's also a major problem. And you said that I agree that the authority, that it should have been split into 2 states. I don't believe that. I think it's actually kind of outside of the idea if as far as the need for immigration, for obvious reasons. As far as the need for immigration, I think it's kind of outside of that argument, because it's about a state, and if that should be a national state. It's not about the immigration status. And the funny thing about the immigration status is that this is the reason for the Fourth Geneva Convention that they're charged with violating. That I keep really, when I'm talking about these things, when I say that they're apartheid or whatever, it's a violation of the Fourth Geneva Convention. And the way that this plays in the UN is that they're the body that's taxed to they have to enforce it, and they're not enforcing it. So for that reason, I would say because they've been violating all this stuff for like 80 years. They're not enforcing it, and it's a problem, not only in the region, but it's a problem worldwide. It's a problem for us here in the United States, because we're providing all the aid for this to happen, and specifically to the UN. So we're binded to this. But with the UN, we're vetoing. We have a veto power in the Security Council, so we can override all this stuff. So usually we just, if it were to do something, there is a doctrine that's in this. I believe it's called the doctrine that's in place is the Negroponte, because that was the guy's name. The Negroponte policy, and I'll provide a link about that. Basically, it says that if it were to do something to Israel, that would affect it negatively. Like if they're actually going to do something, so it's like somebody keeps getting arrested with drunk driving, and they give them their license back the next day, basically. So basically, this is saying that yeah, they get a ride home. is basically what is the policy that we had anyway. And then I think what's really scary about this is Nikki Haley. I mean, we want to talk about their bias or not. We're at a point where, and because this was to the Obama administration and Kerry, they were actually, as I've illustrated last time, as I suggested to you last time, they're actually very concerned that that it's becoming one state, and the policy is to be one state, in spite of the UN and the US having a policy contrary that it's 2 states. And I think dividing of the land was the problem in the first place, but it doesn't really matter now because it's supposed to be two states, but it's not. It's actually one state, and that's really the best way to illustrate the problem here. So to answer your questions, Sebastian, I'm going to go ahead and, because I've had some time here, I think I've had about 5 minutes to your 10, but I'm going to go ahead and those are my questions. I want to know, what resolution was it that affected Israel in a negative way, or and basically my points are that the UN isn't doing what you're claiming at all, basically, and that we're actually headed toward a policy that is very one-sided because what I needed to add there is, yeah, we're headed toward this one-sided policy with Nikki Haley, where she's gonna, through congressional power, she wants to make it difficult for the UN to do anything to punish Israel, even if it's only symbolic, because that's what I'm saying. Like, maybe we have these 80 resolutions. There's more than that. But it's really symbolic. They're just acknowledging that it's going on. No one's doing anything about it. So I mean, how is this not like the drunk driver who gets their license handed back the next day? And
I mean, I personally think that that's a radical analogy to give. You make it seem as almost as if Israel is like the aggressor. I mean, like, in regards to the resolutions that I documented prior to coming to this debate, no, I did not. I thought it would just take up a lot of time for me to explain the resolution, so I just didn't take the time to do it. I personally believe that if today or tomorrow Israel was to drop all its weapons and say, "Hey, look, Palestine, have whatever you want," it would not change the current feeling about Israel. In fact, it'll only expose Israel to just to total destruction, because they would not be able to defend themselves. Versus if the Palestinians were to do that, I believe there will be peace in the Middle East almost immediately, because Israel I don't believe is interested in war as much as Belgium, Denmark, or any small country is interested in war. The size of Israel is New Jersey, and really Israel. I personally believe that if Israel was not so, like, if Israel was easy to be tossed around by the UN, they would not invest 38% of all the resolutions towards condemning them. And that is exactly what I know in regards to resolutions that I was able to condense to make it short. 38% of all the resolutions of the UN Human Rights Council, the top human rights body, have been critical of Israel alone. Now, why is the UN? Now, the question would be, why is the UN's Human Rights Council is not critical of countries like Iran that deny women equal rights, but Israel, when Israel gives women equal rights? The council has a permanent agenda, the way I perceive it, that governs every session, and is composed of 10 items. That it's composed of 10 items, one of which is always reserved for criticizing Israel. Now, can you provide a rational reason for this? And I pass it back to you.
Well, there's an easy reason, and burden of evidence that I've given you that you can't prove, that I've asked you for, is that you can't cite any resolutions. You're not giving me an argument. You're giving me your opinion, because you're saying that you're saying that somehow that they'll be destroyed if they were to do anything for the Palestinians, when you just told me on Monday that 79% of the Palestinians want peace is one state. But you're saying, now you're telling me today that they want total destruction if they even were to have a state. I mean, if it's your opinion that they're not interested in war, I mean, what does that change? And like I just said, as far as I see some facts and a comparison. As far as the 38% goes, they've been violating the Fourth Geneva Convention that the UN is taxed to enforce. That's the major difference. I mean, the Geneva Conventions are the major difference in human rights, because they're non-binding. They give human rights to everyone. It's the authority where they have human that we have these rights under. They've been violating that since the very beginning, since 1948, and they've been in this idea of them. So the 38%. They've been doing this for so long, And I think the best comparison to saying that there's a high number. I mean, what if there was a high number of resolutions against South Africa, in spite of the fact that this same thing was going on in Kosovo and other areas of Africa at the same time, but there weren't a lot of resolutions. So we have seen this kind of thing before. And as far as the comparison of Iran, like I said, Iran has signed the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Israel hasn't. So that would be one major difference. And Iran has tried to get the UN to make Israel sign the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and they won't do it. We won't let them, force them. The U.S. That's where the U.S. steps in. They won't let that happen. And the other thing is they have been critical of Iran. We have sanctions against Iran that have totally crippled their economy. It might not be a war where we're bombing over there, but it's an economic war, and it's been ongoing, and it's still an issue in the news. So I think that's a very poor comparison, Sebastian. And you know, and then this argument is not the same as the things that you told me before. So I want to point that out, and especially since I'm basing this on the outcome of the resolution, and I'm not hearing anything about what resolution it is. I'm just hearing a lot of your opinion that these are bad, and I mean, you're entitled to that opinion, but I want to argue with you.
Okay, you mentioned the Non-Proliferation Treaty that Israel did not sign. Can you explain in depth what this treaty would require Israel not to do or not to do? Can you further explain?
You're talking about the Non-Proliferation Treaty?
Yeah. Can you explain that in depth? Like, what would that require of Israel should Israel have signed it?
That means that they'd have to let people inspect their nuclear facility, which they will not do. And Iran has people there every week inspecting their facility. That's the difference.
That's the difference. Well, it's one thing, okay, but Israel's not threatening the Arab countries surrounding it that it is going to destroy them. It is committed to their annihilation. So that's one of the fundamental reasons
They're not
why
committed to their annihilation.
Yes, I gave you charters. I gave you summits. I gave you, yeah.
I've talked to you 4 times, and Michael talked to you, and in all these debates, you go off in every single direction, and Michael and I do our best to try to explain this, and the people who watch it have no idea what we're even talking about, because you go off in so many. There's no way to ground this, and I'm grounding this on. You're not telling me that what resolution it is. You're telling me what your opinion is.
When we had this conversation,
someone needs to tell you because
asked me earlier.
Someone needs to tell you this because
you asked me earlier. You asked me earlier. Do I have the resolution? I told you I did not do this for this debate. I did not prepare this for this debate. However, I do know the percentages. That's all. That's what I told you. If I had the resolution, it would take forever, and I made that clear. I don't know why you're bringing that back up. So that should not even.
It's only a finish.
I gave you accounts.
I can tell you all about.
I gave you accounts. I gave you accounts. I gave you historical accounts. I gave you the Summit League and what happened at the Summit League. No peace with Israel, no negotiation with Israel, no resolution with Israel. That is not personal opinion. I'm giving you the famous 3 no's, which was a historical precedent that happened. I gave you that. Okay, you didn't write it down. That's your problem. That's not my problem.
But who was the Summit League? What year and what? Because I just heard about the International Court of Justice. And I didn't hear what resolution it was.
But don't say I never said it. Don't say I never said it. That's not right, dude.
You didn't explain what it was. You gave your.
I mentioned it in my 3rd point.
Enough about it.
You didn't hear it. Don't tell me I did not say that. I know I said it.
Well, tell me about the Summit League, then. That's your argument. Like, there's a reason. Tell me. I want to know what it is. I really do.
At the Summit League, what everyone learned was that the Arab countries that surround Israel, and including how much influence they have over Palestine, they're not interested in recognizing Israel as a state, nor are they interested in any resolution passed by the UN. They're not serious about honoring any of it. Because I told you at the Arab League Summit, which was in Khartoum, Sudan in 1967, following the 6-Day War, and they issued an infamous 3-no. They as a conclusion of the summit, they said no peace with Israel. They all agreed to it. They said no recognition of Israel. They all agreed to it. And no negotiations with Israel. They all agreed to it. The UN knew about this, and yet they did not condemn this summit. This summit bars any potential peace or any potential negotiation Israel can have with them, even if it's with the Non-Proliferation Treaty, because there is no integrity on the side of Arabs.
This is
Yes,
in 1967.
correct.
Okay, well, what you're forgetting is that there's a lot there's is only 50 years now since 1967. Well, that was what that yeah, that was 50 years this month actually. But what you're forgetting is that in 1973 there was a whole Geneva Convention on this where they reset all the parameters. So you're not, so that would be so no, the UN had a whole new convention, a whole new Geneva Convention, and couldn't solve this in 1973. Then in 1979, Jimmy Carter made the only deal that anyone's made and said everything forward with the Oslo Accords. I'm not going to comment if that was good or bad, but they met again. They met in 1979, and then of course they met again in the 90s. We've talked about that before. Um, uh, and they talked again in 2015, 2016. I mean, there's no point in me mentioning it every time I talk, but there's a lot of history since then. So for you to say that, that because an event happened outside of the UN, they didn't do anything. No, you're wrong. They did all kinds of stuff since then. They had a whole new Geneva Convention. Jimmy Carter sat down and met with them in private. Bill Clinton sat down with them. All the presidents have tried to. Every president has tried to solve this. And the funny thing is now that it's Trump, and I mean that not I mean, well, I'll illustrate it this way. I
Right, can I
actually
speak now?
remember. Well, you're not letting. No, you need to let me finish and not cut me off so people understand
ahead.
what this is about. The thing. So when I got interested in this, I remember the soundbite was Hillary Clinton saying that because the UN declare the Palestinians could have an observer state. It's not even a full state. They have something that looks like a state. The UN said they could have an observer state. That the UN was abusing the peace process. That was Hillary Clinton's soundbite. But the comparison is that it is Trump. He like as I said before, Mike Obama because Kerry went ahead and didn't veto against Israel on this idea that it's one state and they're not working toward a two state process. It's basically over. That Trump is taking that on in a way that just says that it's one state and that the UN will enforce it that way, and that the Geneva Convention and this report that Nikki Haley had thrown out immediately that said it was apartheid, that those things cannot happen. And they're trying to pass legislation through the UN specifically targeted at BDS. I'm not going to talk about if BDS is a good idea or not. I'm just saying that it's a big enough deal to them that they're gonna try to stop BDS through the UN. Okay, so go ahead, Sebastian.
All right. You said Bill Clinton, and I was excited when you said Bill Clinton because in the year 2000, when Bill Clinton was president, Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak met at Camp David with Palestinian Liberation Organization leader Yasser Arafat to conclude a new two-state plan. Barak offered Arafat a Palestinian state, all of Gaza, 94% of the West Bank, and East Jerusalem as its capital. Yasser Arafat rejected the offer. Even Bill Clinton, who was present, said, Arafat was here 14 days and said no to everything. Later that year, the Palestinians launched a bloody wave of suicide bombings that killed over 1,000 Israelis, hospitalizing another 1,000. On buses, wedding halls, and pizza parlors, they bombed it all through rockets there, etc. Now, my thing is the UN was aware of this, but yet they did not condemn Arafat and his PLO army rocket and suicide bombings on Israel following the Camp David Akar summit that they met at, in which they were knowledgeable that Arafat rejected every offer made to him by the Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak at the time. Now, if that doesn't communicate some sort of bias or selective hearing, I really don't know how else I can reason this unfair treatment of Israel to you.
Oh, you want to talk about some one-sidedness? You said, I mean, first of all, I really don't think that because a peace deal didn't work out, that means that the UN is biased against Israel. I don't see the correlation there. And this is also a new argument. So as you're tallying your sheet, please tally this is a new argument and that my questions aren't being answered. But we've talked about this before, so this is why this gets so exhausting. For the example that I didn't say before, and it kind of goes back to what we talked about that I should have said, so I'm going to say it this way, is East Jerusalem. That is not their capital. That's actually part of the Israeli state. Their capital is, I think it's Raqqa. I'm not 100% positive on that, but it's a suburb that's outside of Jerusalem. So you're saying it's in Jerusalem? It's not. And they didn't have freedom of press. Israel controlled the press. They still controlled all of the resources. So no, it wasn't a fair deal. As far as them not condemning something, I really like to see a citation on that. As I've illustrated, the UN has tried several times to resolve this, but the thing is that Israel pursues one state in spite of the fact that the policy that the UN created in the first place was two states. It started the thing, they created two states. That's where the authority came from. And ever since then, Israel has sought one state, and that's what's really going on here. So.
All right.
Okay.
So just some earlier points you made that I want to rebut. You said Israel help. No, you said that we should not be helping out any country like in the world, in the UN, et cetera, et cetera. Israel is the only country in the Middle East that is a democracy, that respects human rights, that respect women's rights, that gives people self-determination to vote inside their country, including Arabs. You have Arabs in parliament as well. And this is the reason why we fund them. And that is the only justification why we fund Israel. They're a democracy.
It really sounds like an argument for next time, Sebastian. We should do the apartheid.
You made that point.
Basically, let me just say it this way. Because your opinion that Israel is a democracy does not mean the UN is biased against them. And it does not answer any of my questions. It does not.
What question do you want me to answer? What question do you want me to answer? Besides the resolution question, what question do you want me to answer?
So what I'm saying is that for you to win this argument, I think this is the third time I've said this, that you need to illustrate how they've been affected negatively by the UN, and I have not heard that. I've just heard that in your opinion that the UN that for all these different reasons, I mean we're probably up to. I've got 3 pages. We're probably up to 20 or 25 different arguments that here. It's not correlated to. It's not correlated. It's not correlated together. So now, I mean, now I'm telling this is you're saying that because you believe that Israel is a democracy, that's a separate debate, that the UN is biased against them.
That's not what I'm saying. I gave you reasons why I say it's a democracy. It's not about my opinion. I never said it was my opinion. I said this is the reason why they're a democracy. I gave you the list of reasons.
You're giving me a list of reasons. That's all. It's like if we're having, like, you and I were going to get together for dinner and ask you what you wanted to eat, and I basically said I think it would be great if we ate this. Like, this is what we should have to drink, and this can be our appetizer, and we'll have this as our main meal, and this is what we'll have for dessert. And you're saying, well, let's have this. Let's have that. I don't want this. Let me have that. It's. I mean, you know, I'm not saying the arguments can't be formed that way, but it's not correlated together.
I gave you 3 solid accounts when I opened up as to why I believe that the UN is unfair to Israel. I gave you accounts not based on opinion. I gave you accounts based on historical events that happened, and the UN did not condemn any of the surrounding countries that violated international law, and that is not personal opinion. I gave you 3 solid accounts, and you did not answer my question.
You didn't give me solid accounts. I've already talked to you about that. You talked about it
by condemning me, saying that I'm using my personal opinion, and you went on a tangent, basically throwing ad hominem attacks. You didn't answer my questions, and I want to make that clear. You did not answer my question, Julian. I'll be honest with you.
What question and what ad hominem attack?
You mentioned people that I debated in other debates. And you're talking about how I don't have a clarity on this issue. That's all you did. You just stayed there and condemned.
How did I mention them?
I gave you accounts. You mentioned someone I debated last time. But look, dude, this topic is the UN is unfair to Israel. I want you to give me solid accounts as to how the UN is fair to Israel.
That's what I'm asking you.
That disputes the claims I make.
Unfair? What resolution? How did it affect them? What resolution? How did it affect them?
I gave you. I told you. I did not document the resolutions, but yeah, I told you the percentage
It's,
of
you're not
what
giving me
their
facts.
sessions
It's
are
not
dedicated.
sequential. I'm hearing your opinion. I really like to move my argument forward now.
Go ahead.
This is pointless.
Go ahead.
So the UN created a national homeland for both parties in the partition plan in 1948. Because it is the authoritative body that created the conflict, it is responsible in the peace process. So basically the reason that they're responsible and the reason that they're trying to enforce is the Fourth Geneva Convention. And what that does is it gives protections for civilians in a war zone. And this is what they're not doing. This is just in regard to the Palestinians. And it's non-binding under Article 2, so it doesn't matter if they want to recognize it or not. It's non-binding. It sets the parameters for the earlier Geneva Conventions because they kind of apply here too. But I think the things that apply to this debate, what we've been talking about earlier, mostly the fourth one, it sets the parameters for people in that state. That they can't, they're not subject to violence or collective punishment, which they are. Section 3. So basically, the specific sections of the Geneva Convention are 47 through 78 imposes obligations on the state. 49 stops forcible transfers. So that's the big thing. Here is that there's so many refugees who can't return, and with that in mind, they're also responsible through 53 for personal property, and they have to provide security, and those are all things that haven't been met here. So when somebody like Nikki Haley says that we should just abandon the UN and it should just be looked at as one state, that means that these people, that they don't have any rights to their private property that was taken from them. And so forth and so on, and the UN's not doing anything about this. So how can they be biased? I mean, come on. So there's 80 resolutions, and basically, as I've said, through the Negroponte, that's the guy's name, through that doctrine, we have been vetoing all these resolutions anyway. We veto them under fighting terror, under the idea that it is fighting terrorism. So like you said, you said they didn't acknowledge what the Palestinians were doing. We vetoed this. How many? I don't know. I don't even know how many times. Probably hundreds of times, probably. If not, it's at least tens, if not hundreds. Under fighting terrorism, because we the United States said that it didn't accomplish the Palestinians. So those are the laws that are being applied here. And I'm not hearing about the history either. We've got about 6 minutes. I think what the best thing to do is, I'm just going to go ahead and close. And if you want to add to the closing, since there's only like 6 or 7 minutes, you can do that. And that's going to have to be the debate. But so as you can see, Sebastian is clearly not illustrating how the UN has been biased against Israel, because we have not heard what resolution was biased against Israel or how it affected them at all. We've heard a lot of different reasons. I mean, I think I have, let's see, I write this down, I take notes. I think I'm just going to say there's probably 20 different things I've listed here, and none of them are sequential at all. I heard, like, for instance, that's because he believes it's a democracy, that the UN is biased. I heard that they didn't condemn one act, but we vetoed all these bills under the idea that was happening. So that obviously can't be true. I heard that they weren't equally critical of Iran when Israel violates the non-proliferation treaty, and Iran doesn't. And I've explained how this stuff's non-binding, how there are violations of human rights that the UN is tasked to enforce. In fact, and let me add this to that. This is because of the Holocaust. The reason that we have the Fourth Geneva Convention and we have these rules that apply to refugees and war zones and all this sort of thing, is because of the Holocaust and prevent that sort of thing from happening again. And the reason that there is a national state is because of UN, and because of the UN, this international body to begin with. So it's literally just defying the face. And so in comparison, I told you how about the 80 resolutions that have been violated, and I'll cite all this, and I encourage Sebastian to cite as well. And I've also explained how they violated the Non-Proliferation Treaty, going back to the comparison with Iran. And I've also talked about how now Congress and the Trump administration are going on a total left turn through the UN, where they are trying to stop BDS. If you think it's a good idea or not, I'm not going to go into that, but they're trying to stop it, and they're trying to make it next to impossible for the UN to do any of these criticisms in regard to the Non-Proliferation Treaty or the Palestinians' rights at all. Because the United Nations created Israel, it is responsible for that.
Julian, I'm not gonna get a chance to talk, man. Not at all, right?
I'm almost done, Sebastian. You just I mean, just go ahead. Go ahead. Yeah.
All
sure.
right, I get the last 3 minutes and 30 seconds.
Okay, but I hope the judge notices that you are going all over the place.
Can I get the last 3 minutes and 30 seconds? Can I?
Flowing. Sure.
Can I get the last 3 minutes? Okay. All right. I just want to rebut. The U.S. is the UN. The U.S. is not the UN. I want to respond to that. In 1948, the UN admitted Israel as a member state. At the time, there were 58 members in 1949, and they had a pro-democratic Western orientation. Today, the reason why Nikki Haley is condemning them so much is because that orientation has had a shift in 2017. The UN now has 193 member countries, most of which are not free countries, countries that oppress their people, don't honor basic Western values. The UN no longer champions self-determination of human rights around the world. Today, they're very antagonistic towards Western values, and this is exposed in their treatment of Israel. Can you give me a rational explanation why you still find UN, Julian, still credible despite the bias and anti-Semitic orientation I exposed opening this debate?
Well, now I'm going to answer your question, but you're
I'm not giving you a chance to answer that. No, you spoke already. I want to speak now. Please.
You asked me a question. Am I supposed to answer it? You used that ad hominem. Go on. I'm just saying you're not letting me answer your question. Use that hominem.
No, let me talk. You gotta let me talk, man. I let you talk. You gotta let me talk. I asked you a question. You didn't answer it. You just went on a tangent. Now let me finish my bullet points.
You didn't let me. You said I'm supposed to answer your question, and then you kept.
No, you're not gonna answer it. You're just gonna go on a tangent. You're just gonna go on a tangent. You're not gonna answer my question. Between 2006.
I'll answer your question.
No, you're not. You're not. No, you're not. Let me finish. Between 2006 and 2012. Between 2006 and 2012, the UN published 48 reports condemning Israel. During that same period, there were 9 reports on serious mass killing and torture of its citizens, 3 on Iran's genocide-threatening regime, and none on China, which denies more than 1 billion people elementary freedoms. Why does Israel,
you really have to new argument with a minute and a half left, Sebastian? You're not doing this again. The only good thing I heard in the last debate was
Why does Israel, a democracy with free press, gays live openly, women have equal rights, have more condemnation from the UN than countries known for violating basic human rights, denies women liberties, denies kills homosexuals, and human rights violation is run out of this world. It's out of this world in those countries.
Well, in my opinion, they should do that too. But I'm
going to address another point now. Can I address another? I'm going to address another point now.
Okay, well, I answered. What am I supposed to answer in 45 seconds?
In closing statements, I'm going to close by saying
you're not going to close this.
That I recommend everyone to check out the book "The Case for Israel" by Harvard Law professor Alan Dershowitz. You'll be surprised by what you'll learn. The UN is consumed with hatred and anti-Semitism, one that once consumed me. And if you would like to know the truth, this is where you can find it. because it could change me. It could definitely change the UN and its members. And you can speak now, Junior. You have 20 seconds.
Thanks again for talking, Sebastian. You know, as heated as this was, I hope that no one thinks that this is personal or anything like that. And I know that the reason that both you and I get emotional is because it's important to both of us. And I hope you have a good night. And I thank everyone for watching.
Man. Thanks a lot.